All right, guys, get ready for a wild and tempestuous weekend of protests and counter-protests, the likes of which we've never before seen. Most people have not taken a moment to appreciate the scale, the malignance, the virality of these demonstrations that we're seeing around the world today. These will go down in history as being the largest collective demonstrations ever in the history of humankind. And what we're about to see this weekend is the confluence of three events. One, we're going to see a continuation of those demonstrations in spite of the fact that it is going to be Armistice Day, Remembrance Day, also known as Veterans Day in some places. And this is going to make for an interesting cauldron of civil unrest in the many cities around the world where you have protesters and counter-protesters calling attention to that fact. But you're also likely going to see the onset and the official beginnings, the genesis of a new conflict emerging on the Hezbollah-Lebanon front. We have the leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, who is going to be giving his much anticipated speech tomorrow, although a lot of people are not holding their breath on that and not putting too much stock in it in light of his recent rather lackluster performance. He tends to speak very cryptically and circuitously about declarations of war and his intentions towards Israel and the United States, but we may well see the formal declaration of war between Lebanon and Israel this weekend. So it's going to get interesting. Now, this video is primarily going to be an addendum to the update that I gave yesterday, and we're going to primarily be focusing on Russia versus NATO in this because there's some major military maneuvers taking place that are being overshadowed by the events in the Middle East, and people cannot take their attention away from what is going on the Russian-Ukrainian front because it is very significant. But before I talk about that, just a brief update as to why things might pop off on the Lebanese front this weekend. Now, I've seen multiple videos today showing Chinook helicopters, American Chinook helicopters, apparently flying and operating in the Lebanese airspace. Now, this hasn't been geolocated yet, as far as I know. Unfortunately, when you're talking about social media, the truth is still getting its pants on while lies spread around the world. So we don't really know what these helicopters' purpose was, where they exactly were, but people seem to be pretty confident that they were in northern Lebanon. Now, if that's true, the only explanation I can conjure is that they're likely evacuating VIPs. As far as I know, diplomatic operations were still functioning in Lebanon. We're talking about the United States, but they may be vacating now because they're getting ready for the war to flare up. Why might the war flare up? Well, apparently there's been some escalating exchanges on the border in the last 24 hours to the tune of 7 Hezbollah fighters losing their lives, which would be some of the most intense fighting to date. We're talking about the launching of UAVs, anti-aircraft missiles, anti-tank missiles, and all sorts of skirmishes intensifying on that front. So we may well see those things emerge over the weekend. And it's just another weekend where you might want to stay home because the unrest that we're seeing is only going to intensify. The only mitigating factor here is winter and the fact that a lot of North American cities are going to start getting too cold for people to stay outside too long. If this was happening in summertime, boy, would it be a summer of rage. It would be one for the ages. It already is. If this unrest persists into the spring and summer, look out because it is going to be the purge. Now, if you want an in-depth breakdown of what's going on in the Middle East, please go and just take a look at that video I did yesterday. I'm not saying it's 100% correct. It's a lot of hypotheticals. It's a lot of speculation, but it's informed by facts. And I think it will provide people an interesting overview and an understanding of why the United States was preparing for this major war, which is not about Gaza. Gaza is just a leading indicator, okay? This is not about Gaza. You don't bring all these aircraft carriers and all this military equipment just for that. Not a chance. We know that this is much, much bigger. This is a world war. And a lot of people are just waiting for that mushroom cloud to make it official. Don't wait for that. Prepare for World War now. Once it happens, it's going to be too late. That's when the panic is going to sink in and everybody jaws are going to be on the floor. And at that moment in time, people are going to be blowing up my phone and I'm going to say, sorry, we warned you. Anyways, let's talk about what's going on in the Baltic and the Black Sea. Something is going on. This is the flight pattern of that U.S. reconnaissance drone, that Fort 10 that's always flying around the Black Sea. Now, I meant to show this on the big screen yesterday. I got to rambling about the Middle East. The video was 45 minutes long, so I said I'd break it into 2 videos. That's what we're talking about today. Russia versus NATO. Now, this flight pattern has typically been back and forth over the Black Sea, overseeing what's going on here in Crimea. Suddenly, this flight pattern has taken a more southern, I guess that would be southeastern, as far as the Black Sea is concerned, southeastern flight pattern. Now, why has the U.S. recon plane moved back into this region? This is very significant, okay? Because as I've speculated for some time, this massive military buildup in the Mediterranean is not just about it's not about Gaza at all. It's about the Middle East, but it's also about Turkey. It's also about Russia. They're positioning their forces much, much closer to Russia. Look at what is happening. We're going to talk about the Baltic Sea as well. Now, this flight pattern has been altered. Okay, there's been a shitload of stuff that's went on here that's been completely overshadowed by the Middle East issue that I cannot begin to talk about, but there's been a lot of attacks on Russian ports. The Russians have brought in more air defense. They're starting to move away from artillery, it seems, back into ATACMS, long-range missile warfare, which is not good. That's an escalation. Now, why is the reconnaissance plane now following this flight pattern instead of its standard flight pattern where it broaches the Crimean Peninsula a little bit more? Well, I think the reason why it's multifold, okay? One of the reasons is that this grain corridor is now coming under direct attack by the Russians. They've dropped sea mines in there, and perhaps this grain corridor has proven more strategic for NATO to hold on to. You have Russian MiG-31s patrolling the Black Sea with Kinzhal missiles, specifically as a deterrent to this NATO amassing of force that's happening down here in the Mediterranean, okay? It could also have something to do with what's going on in Turkey. Maybe they don't trust Erdogan, okay? Maybe it's because the Russians have sent some signals that you need to back the fuck up out of this region or we're going to start shooting these things down. Maybe it has something to do with the Houthis shooting down one of their drones. Whatever the reason is, this is a marked change in strategy, especially if this flight pattern persists here, okay? It says that something fundamental has changed. I've been watching this particular drone fly around for 18 months. It's always had that standard flight pattern. I don't recall a time when it had this south to north flight pattern situation as it does right now. That means that something has changed in the equation, okay? Some other things to take note of that have been happening in the last 48 hours. Germany is now taking back its Patriot missile defense systems that it put in Poland. They put these there last year in response to what was originally thought to be a Russian missile that hit Poland, but it turned out it was a Ukrainian missile defense, a S-200 missile or S-300, something like that. So now they're saying that they're going to be redeploying these as part of the NATO Rapid Response Force. Some people speculate that they may actually be moving these to other regions, possibly even the Middle East. But this is significant because we're seeing a lot of military maneuver right now, especially in the Baltic. Here's what's happening in the Baltic. You know that massive amassing of force that we are seeing in the Mediterranean and in the Red Sea and in the Persian Gulf? Get a load of this. 3 aircraft carriers now in the Baltic Sea. Guys, DEFCON 2 is, I mean, we're almost, you know, if you wanted, there would never be a more ideal situation that a person would speculate about DEFCON 2 than now, especially in light with what I'm about to tell you. 3 aircraft carriers in the Baltic. One is the HMS Queen Elizabeth. Okay, this is the Royal Navy's largest and only, I guess, most powerful ship ever built. You know, their aircraft carrier, I think they only have one as far as I know. This now is sailing under NATO command for the first time. Why? Why now? Why is it that all of the European aircraft carriers are starting to funnel in to the Baltic Sea? Remember what happened in the Baltic Sea recently? You had that undersea cable severed. Well, we know about Nord Stream. That was a pretty big issue, wasn't it? But we also had recently a Chinese ship now be accused of taking out an undersea cable and a pipeline as well between Finland, was it Finland and Estonia? And we've had talks of them cutting Russian access off, cutting St. Petersburg off from the Baltic Sea. That would be a massive escalation. We got Germany moving 4,500 troops into the Baltics. And now you have these 3 aircraft carriers, the Italian aircraft carrier, the ITS Cavour, and the Spanish ESP Juan Carlos, in addition to the Royal Navy's aircraft carrier, all moving into the Baltic. Now, they say it's going to be for an exercise or something like that. There are no military exercises, only World War III disguises. We also have 2 squadrons of F-35s, likely that will be armed, or at least capable of being armed, with the US's new tactical nuclear weapon, or modified nuclear weapon. The media is kind of playing it up to be more than it really should be played up to be, because they've had nukes that are 24 times the size of Hiroshima for a long time. These are dial-a-yield nukes. They go up to like 400 kilotons or something like that. These ones are going to be around 350 kilotons. Regardless, 2 squadrons, 50 F-35s heading to England. You don't think that's going to put Russia on edge? Okay? Regardless of what this is, you don't think this is going to catch Russia's attention? And when it catches Russian attention, you don't think that that's going to increase our DEFCON level over here? We're in for a rude awakening with respect to what's coming. We also have a U.S. deploying a tactical airlift system in Northern Europe. This complex can simultaneously control 200 aircraft at the same time, and the system can be deployed in minutes. These are major maneuvers, all right? We also have NATO threatening a blockade of Kaliningrad. We have the commander of NATO forces in Lithuania, Colonel Peter Nielsen, threatening a blockade of Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg. They're saying that the Russian Federation is going to invade the Baltics when Ukraine is defeated, and Iran and China go to war against Israel and Taiwan, respectively, while U.S. attention is focused on the Middle East and the Asia-Pacific region. This is what they think, or this is what they're saying. They actually believe that the Russians are going to go even further. Now, according to this Lithuanian commander, he is saying that we need to potentially cut off Kaliningrad, whether they do that through the Suwalki corridor, where we're already seeing the amassing of force on both the Poland side and the Lithuanian side, with HIMARS, with offensive weapons systems in that region. Of course, Kaliningrad is an exclave of Russia, which very likely contains nuclear weapons that would be utilized to neutralize their opponents in Europe rather quickly. And if Kaliningrad is cut off, this is a major problem because, of course, this means that Russia is probably going to just let it rip at that point. Because if they're cut off, especially if they have some of their key assets there, we're talking about some of their best weapon systems, they don't want that falling into the wrong hands, okay? So this is why you're starting to see these rumblings now of NATO commanders getting very concerned about the Baltic states and other maneuvers because, of course, they're now starting to have exhausted their Ukrainian fighting base. And now you're seeing images of pregnant women, okay, being taken POW, prisoner. This is on camera. This is documented. Unless it was an act put out by the Russian propaganda apparatus, it's hard to say. But we know that women are fighting on the front lines, or at least performing medical duties and other auxiliary duties on the front line. One of these women was captured and she claimed she was pregnant. She looked pretty pregnant by the video to me. So that's a sign, okay? So they're starting to have exhausted the Ukrainians and now they're getting ready to execute Plan B, which is directly going to war with the Russians. Remember what Tucker Carlson said just a few months ago, that he had an inkling that they were about to go to war with the Russians. Now, if you don't respect me, I totally can appreciate that. I really don't give a flying you-know-what. But take it from him if you're one of those people who needs his approval to believe such a thing. Russia has also extended its warning against traveling to the United States. Now, why would they do this now if people are talking about peace talks? Why would they reiterate and advise against people traveling to the United States when supposedly we're being told that the money for Ukraine is drying up? Don't worry, and everything's going to be fine now. Zelensky's going to fold. They're going to turn tail. Russia's going to get the annexed territories, and that's going to be the end of the story. Not at all. Not a chance. Remember, this is existential for both Russia and the U.S. dollar. That's what it comes down to. It's existential for the U.S. empire, and all the European states are just vassals of the U.S. empire, as are South Korea, Taiwan, all these Middle Eastern nations, all just vassal states of the dying U.S. empire, okay? Russians considering frivolous trips to the U.S. should think again, according to Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, said Thursday, warning that American authorities have ramped up their arrests on the pretext of trade violations, okay? We also have heard the Russians consider cutting diplomatic ties with the United States. Again, why now? Why would they be talking about cutting diplomatic ties? Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, once again, same guy, Sergei Ryabkov, says he doesn't rule out anything at all. The level of diplomatic ties may be lowered and the severance of diplomatic relations is also possible. Why are they making these threats at this point in time? There are rumors, and I'm not going to say these are just rumors. There's definitely, there's fire to this smoke. Russian S-400 being destroyed in large amounts in the last month or so, okay? Apparently, in the last 6 weeks, 4 Russian S-400 missile defense systems may have been taken out by ATACMS. Now, again, these are distributed systems with the launchers and the command and control, so one ATACMS is not going to be able to take out every component of the system. But we do know that Putin has visited Rostov-on-Don, which is the central command headquarters for the Ukrainian conflict, twice in the past month, which is different. And we know that they deployed another S-400 in advance of his visit there. Probably that was the reason why. But the question is, if we're supposed to be seeing tensions alleviate, then why is Putin so paranoid? And why does he need yet another S-400 there in advance of his presence in Rostov-on-Don? What is he doing there twice, meeting his top commanders and generals in the last 2 months, and the last time, well, it was just in the last 24 hours that he went there once again. So this attritional campaign, if the United States ATACMS that they're sending, and recall, I told you guys a week ago that they're not only using ATACMS now, they're using long-range Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles from old stock, because apparently they've been depleting the existing stock of Scalp and Storm Shadow, so they had to go into the older stock, which had a longer range. Okay, so they're using long-range ATACMS, long-range Storm Shadow to take out Russian S-400. Why would they want to take out Russian missile defense? Because they want to get at that Kerch Bridge. It's not only a Pyrrhic victory, it's definitely a strategic one if they can slow progress over that bridge. But this also poses many strategic risks to Russia if they continually get their air defense hit. It's all about taking out the air defense before you can do any major damage, and that's a massive escalation. It's not horizontal. It is definitely vertical. The Russians are claiming that they are still producing 1.5 million shells a month. This is according to Estonian intelligence. 1.5 million artillery shells a month. That means they can burn 50,000 artillery shells a day and still be good. But again, it appears as though while there is still an artillery war going around, and while the Russians have 40,000 troops surrounding Avdiivka, which appears to be on the brink of collapse, or appears to be in that untenable state of affairs that Bakhmut found itself in months before its fall, where it was just inevitable at some point. You know, this is significant because in addition to the artillery wars, we're now seeing this increased long-range missile conflict heating up between ATACMS and the S-400 and the Russian taking out Ukrainian warplanes. Somebody's getting desperate. There's a lot of rumors circulating about whether or not the CIA is going to take Zelensky out, yada, yada, yada. I'm not even buying any of that at this point, because I still think that the U.S. has a vested interest in maintaining a Ukrainian front, but it may well just be that thing has been bled dry. And in terms of manpower, in terms of their ability to mobilize, if we're getting to the point where they're putting women on the front lines, then it might mean that, you know, the collapse is near. So what does that mean? Then that means NATO needs to rout and fall back to Poland and the Baltic states and start reinforcing those places. Okay, so it's about to get very, very interesting. Zelensky has prolonged martial law and mobilization for another 3 months, as he usually does. It should also be known that there's another interconnection here between the Russians and what's going on in the Middle East, not only in Syria, of course. Syria has had its airports completely bombed out by the Israelis as of recent. I don't even know how they're tolerating this at this point. I don't know how the Russian S-400 hasn't been activated to take out these Israeli F-35s that are doing all this damage there. I don't know what's really going on, okay? Maybe there's some back-channel negotiations. Maybe somebody is just not ready to pull the trigger on that yet. But Syria's airfields have been destroyed by the Israelis. Now, if they can't utilize these airfields to get in Iranian equipment to give to Hezbollah, then that is the first thing that you're going to see taking place before a major war. You're trying to cut off their supply lines. Now, once they target the Lebanese airport, that's when you know it's begun. That's when you know the war has begun. Right when they target a country's airport, they're officially at war. Now, they've been officially at war with Syria for some time. But once they go after Lebanon's airport, if they do that this weekend, after Nasrallah's speech, you know that the war between Israel and Lebanon has officially begun. We know that Hezbollah has gotten itself some Russian P-800 Onyx missiles that boast a 300-kilometer range that they are suggesting might be used to target the U.S. fleet, okay, that is currently sitting off the coast of, what's that place called? It starts with a C. Somebody's going to bring it up. The place where all the NATO troops are based out of, it's that island that Greece and Turkey always fight over. Oh, it's going to come to me at some point in time. Maybe I got it listed on one of my maps here. I say it in the video 10 times a video. I'm just getting old, I guess. Anyways, Cyprus, that's what it is. Cyprus. All right. So we also have Putin threatening to amass more military forces in light of his pulling out of the conventional forces arms treaty in Europe. Of course, we have no nuclear treaties left. Now we have no conventional armed forces treaty. Even the nuclear treaty with the Japanese that the Russian had that would see them scale back their nuclear weapons is off the table. They've already done nuclear tests, pseudo-nuclear tests in the United States, are about to do more. My friends, this is a brave new world, and it's only going to get worse, okay? Now, we have a German general, retired generals. Leave it to the retired generals to tell you the truth about what's going to happen, because the guys who are still monkey branching, they still have to talk the talk, and they're not going to say what they truly think. And so you have to leave it to the retired generals, all right? The German general, what was his name again here? General Harold Kujat is saying that Russia is preparing to invade Odessa. The losses of the Ukrainian armed forces are exorbitant, especially during the recent failed counteroffensive. Now, I'm not 100% convinced that it's completely failed yet, because, and I know people are going to say, oh, come on, man. It's true that there hasn't been much movement there at all, but remember, you have to think the art of war, okay? So when they're saying we're down and we're beaten, that's when you got to think, oh, do they have something else up their sleeve? I'm just saying it's likely that it's failed and it's ground to a halt, but you never know. Anyways, the Russian armed forces, on the contrary, used defensive tactics and switched to a strategic form of defense, which minimize their losses. Now, rumor has it they're taking a lot of losses in trying to take Avdiivka, but who knows if those losses equate to the Ukrainian losses. Either way, the Russians have a much larger military, they're self-sufficient, they're never going to run out of ammo, etc., etc. Their goal is not to retain territory at any cost, but to destroy the Ukrainian armed forces. Okay, this is the Clausewitz doctrine. This is the rule that you want to disarm the enemy, okay, completely attrit the enemy. It's not about land, it's not about territory, it's about how much you can exhaust the enemy. This is why you can have situations like you did in World War II, basically, where the actual boundaries of the German Empire don't change much at all until the last minute, and then it just rapidly collapses because they invested every single thing. It's all about attritional war. It's about spend rate. Who runs out of ammo first? You run out of ammo, you get steamrolled. That's the Clausewitz doctrine, okay? And then everything else will happen on its own once you can deplete the other side of its capabilities. He says that I believe that at some point the Russians will actually launch a powerful offensive since they've concentrated huge forces in the rear. 350,000 soldiers. So they've solidified those forces in the rear, which will then allow them the leverage they need to go and do some offensive maneuvers. Putin also has said, and this is how you know something else is up, that Russian mobilized men will now stay in service till the end of the special military operation. Now, this could mean one of two things. One is positive, one is negative. One is that the war is about to end, so they're not pulling these guys back to give them a break, all right? And I think it's probably unlikely that that's about to happen. The other is that they're in dire need of soldiers and they're getting ready to do a major offensive maneuver. And so that they need these guys to continue in service and remain on tour of duty until the shit hits the fan, okay? So those are the main points to consider. We also have the Ukrainians targeting the Russian fleet continuously, even though I don't think the Russian naval presence plays a huge role in their strategy. You know, maybe it certainly is having more of a role in their Arctic strategy. But in terms of their Black Sea, yeah, they're using the ships to fire into Ukraine. But they can do everything from the ground that they can do from the sea. Regardless, Ukraine persists in its trying to push back the Russians in the Black Sea, okay? And it'll be interesting to see what emerges from Putin's visit to Rostov-on-Don and the deployment of various S-400 missile defense systems. Now, they're saying that in light of the spend rate of these S-400s, they're having to pull them from other parts of Russia. This is a part of Russia's strategic nuclear deterrent. S-400 missiles can theoretically shoot down ballistic missiles. They can shoot down nuclear missiles. So if they're having to do that, then it becomes an issue of them potentially escalating with Nato, because Nato is leaving them no choice. It's creating a vulnerability which will cause them to increase the likelihood of some preemptive attack on NATO forces. And we are fast approaching a situation where it's undeniable that you're having a huge NATO buildup surrounding not only Turkey, not only the Mediterranean, but also now in the Baltic Sea. And this is only going to continue to ramp up through 2024. Now, Trump has said, he's made it abundantly clear how he feels about the Palestinians. So it is very likely that if he is elected, that war in the Middle East is going to continue. Now, some people are saying, oh, Biden is showing weakness. And see, most people are, they're not long-term thinkers. So they presume, like, why would Biden need to be weak? I mean, he can say whatever he wants and get away. It's not about talking tough. Anybody can talk tough. Countries aren't threatened by that. They're not threatened by that bluster. That's why Putin loved Trump, because he just knew. You could even see when they were around each other that Putin was like, okay, I get what's going on here, but we're not buying it. It's not about, it's about long-term strategy. Trust me, if you're worried about Biden being weak when you have the largest amassing of naval force ever in the Middle East, then you're not thinking, it's not even Biden. We all know who's making decisions. It's not Biden, all right? It's the people around him. So it's not about, don't think about it, oh, we're not attacking right away, we're weak. They got much bigger plans. They got a plan to go to war with Iran, and they're slowly putting it into motion. And nobody's going to be saying they're weak when that happens. Because, yeah. Anyways, watch the video I did yesterday. I'm flying close to the sun here, guys. Flying really, really close to the sun. Trying to stay in that Overton window, just on the edge. If you're too in the middle, then nobody cares what you have to say, because you ain't saying shit. That's why some people, they come out and they sugarcoat their opinions, and they wonder why, nobody wants to hear what they have to say. It's because you're not saying anything. You got to be kind of on the edge, but you don't want to be too much on the edge that you get canceled, okay? Like, anyways. I got to do never mind. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut about that. We had that ransomware attack in China on one of the largest banks. Now, that came after the cyber attack, or what they're not calling it a cyber attack. They're never going to admit it's a cyber attack for insurance purposes, I think, mostly, unless they absolutely have to. And that was what happened in Australia. Australia, China, arch nemesis. It's very likely that these two things are probably related. It's very likely that these were nation-state level hacks or attacks, okay? We have North Korea continuing to shut embassies down around the world. They're saying that this is a budgetary issue. I don't know about that. Now, one of these was in Nepal. We've had one happen in Hong Kong. Why is North Korea shutting embassies? Remember, this is the same North Korea that is obligating its agricultural ministry to make sure that its grain silos are filled up by the end of November. This has never before been done by the North Koreans. Typically, they allow the grain silos to be ready by December. Some people are saying this signals a war preparation. It is hard to say. We're also seeing the Chinese slowly creep around Taiwan with their carriers off the coast of Taiwan. The Shandong carrier detected in waters off of Taiwan. The Chinese aircraft carrier was detected yesterday, and they have numerous other warships within the region. We're also hearing rumblings of Russia and North Korea sharing nuclear technology. My friends, It's one long day in the run-up to World War III, or when it officially becomes recognized as such. Just one long day, just one tragedy after another, unfortunately. Now, even in Iceland, they're saying that there is a 5.1 earthquake, 1,400, what would you call them? I don't know, aftershocks or mini earthquakes in the last 24 hours. So we're going to see nature rear its ugly head in the mix. Keep on prepping, folks. There's a black swan coming. Mark my words. Enjoy this relative peace and calm in the markets because it's not going to last. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.